We're back with part two with John. We're having a look at the chart of Walt Disney that John picked, and in his email to me said it was a great teaching tool and example. So please feel very welcome to share where you start and what you do with this chart, John. Thank you.
Um, my first step in interpretation, I should say that the way that I prepare for the reading is the exact opposite as what happens in the reading. As I said before, in the reading, I start with prediction first and I work my way back to natal potential. In preparing for the reading, it's all about understanding the natal potential and then seeing where the predictions are going. And the first step that happens just naturally, just before the chart can come off the printer while it's up on the screen, your eye just automatically goes to, what's the chart pattern? Is it a bucket, a bowl, a splay? Is it a splash? Your eye is just letting you know what it is. It's the first thing that just pops off the computer screen before the printer puts out the paper. But this is one of my favorite things about this chart. We might consider this actually to be a splay chart by contemporary standards, but if Walt Disney's mother brought him for a reading the day that he was born, way back in 1901, Pluto wasn't discovered yet. So if we take Pluto out of the picture, what we're left with actually is a bucket chart with Neptune as the handle of the bucket, or sometimes it's called the singleton. And this Neptune is especially powerful, not only because it's the handle of the bucket for the time when he was born, but it also sits at the cardinal degree, 0 Cancer, which means that his Neptune is going to reach a world that is far and wide. It is also emphasized because it's the only planet, when he was born, above the horizon. It's also angular, and it rules an angle. And it's the only planet that is retrograde. So this is a very powerful Neptune. So when he was born, I would have said to his mother, gee, he's got a great chart for what will one day be cinema? What's music? And maybe there's going to be one day something called animation, cartoons, something very colorful, larger than life, big. Neptune is a planet that, of course, we associate with film, with music. But in my experience, it is especially associated with animation, because animation is bigger than the movies. It's more fantastic. And of course, his masterpiece is named Fantasia. And he brought together music with film so well. So obviously, by today's astrology, we have to include the Pluto. But I always find it amusing that it would have been a completely different chart pattern if he had come for a reading the day that he was born. When you do add the Pluto up there, by the way, then what you get is the power that he accomplished, the power that he put over other people. He was, if you don't know his story, I find him a fascinating man, not only a good chart to use for teaching, but on the one hand, of course, he was so loved and loving of especially children and his audience. and he took great joy in everything that he brought. But on a personal level, he was a cranky, irritable, and by today's standards, he would probably be diagnosed with OCD. But we can get to those parts later. But what the Pluto is doing up there is giving him a great deal of power. Um, and the ability to transform not only an industry, but how the industry operates. The next thing I go to after understanding the chart pattern is to the elements and modes. Now, you'll never find two astrologers agree on how to count the elements and modes. I think every astrologer has their own way of doing it. Typically, my way of doing it, this is just how I learned it, and I have varied it very little over the years. I give 2 points for the sun, the moon, the ascendant, and midheaven, because those are the fastest moving and most personal parts of the horoscope. I'll contradict myself in 1 minute. And then 1 point for everything else, Mercury through Pluto. I don't count the asteroids in the element. I don't count the nodes, and I don't count Chiron. I'm very traditional in my use of planets this way in relation to the elements and nodes, modes. So when you do this, what you get is 3 points in fire, 6 points in earth, 5 in air, and 2 in water. And even though he's a Sagittarius, and we'll talk about his sun in a moment, but this really makes him an earth-air combination, which was much more his style, actually. Very rigid, rules and regulations, law and order, and something funny happened with the Disney company. Once he started his film studio in Burbank, he bought up the property surrounding it and built tract homes, and he sold them at a very good price to his employees, because he did not want his employees taking a long time to commute. He wanted them to have easy access to the studio, and the studio was designed like a park. So even on the weekends, they could come and enjoy the park and the studio with their family, their children, and so forth. Eventually, what began to happen is that people would go on the weekends and actually work. They would leave their wives and children to play in the park, and they would go in the studio and do their animation. Until a saying began around the Disney lot: if you're not willing to come in on Saturday, then don't bother coming in on Sunday. So the studio is known actually to work their employees a lot. And that would be a very earth-air combination. Also, just the ability to kind of think about something, have an idea about something, and then be able to manifest it. He was very interested in manifestation, obviously. And also the earth, I think, gave him a very keen understanding of real estate. This is not to say that he was a financial mastermind, by the way. In fact, he was a financial disaster. Early in his career, he had already been bankrupt, and he was known actually to come into mounds of money and losses and mounds of money and losses. He was not a very good businessman. What saved him was his brother, Roy. He was the financial mastermind. And after the first bankruptcy, he got Walt together and really started to know how to make money with him. There you see the emphasis in the third house. Not only is the sun there, but also Mercury. Mercury, the ruler of his Virgo rising, therefore the ruler of the chart, is down there in the third house, but it is also the ruler of the midheaven. So his work, his reputation, is going to be all in connection with his sibling, as well as his identity, his lifestyle, the ascendant. Interesting that the brother wielded a great deal of financial power, Scorpio, but stayed very much in the shadows, in the background. And Walt was really the face of the company. That's also the Scorpio on the cusp of the third house. Let me just backtrack a minute, though. I didn't speak much about his modes. He has 7 points in cardinal, only 1 in fixed, and 8 in mutable, which makes him more of a cardinal mutable type, which kind of makes sense. He would love to start things, but would often get bored with things, on to the next, and then leave somebody else to follow up on his ideas. Something that he was known for, once he could afford to start doing this, which was rather early on in his career, what we used to call back then secretaries, now they're executive assistants. His secretary would follow him everywhere he went with a notebook, so that when he came up with an idea, he would tell her to write it down, so he could have a record of all, and he was constantly coming up with ideas. Now, again, that suggests a lot of the mutability, and it emphasizes the importance of his third house, the third house of thinking. After this point, the chart pattern, the elements and modes, I like to go into how many planets are angular, 1, 4, 7, and 10, succedent, 2, 5, 8, and 11, and then mutable, 3, 6, 9, and 12. I think that also lets us know about character, very action-oriented people, more security-oriented people, more mentally oriented people. But also knowing that helps a lot with predictive work. Because when things are happening, when cycles are taking place, for example, in the cadent houses, those are often times when our lives are going to slow down, especially the deeper that we go into the cadent house. And there might be more internal events rather than external events. But when any planet transits over an angle, then you find out why they're called action houses. A transiting planet coming over an angle explodes and it shoots energy. It launches a lot of what was in one's mind, comes out and picks up speed. So that helps me understand for when the client comes, are we going to be talking more about inner events or outer events? Is this a time much for change or more for inner development? And when it is inner development, very often a person is going to complain about feeling stuck. I feel stuck. I can't take action. I make decisions. They don't go into effect. And I try to tell them it's not a period of action. It's a period of stillness. Be still, and then you won't feel stuck. It helps also to know how many planets are below the horizon, above the horizon in terms of introversion, extroversion, what's on the east side, what's on the west side, which is a different kind of introversion, extroversion. A lot of people don't realize those words have two different interpretations. Of course, the south and the north part of the horoscopes define introversion as being more of a homebody and extroversion being out in the world. But the way that Carl Jung interpreted those words, an introvert is someone who lives by his own values, which is more the east side of the chart. And the west side of the chart is the extrovert who lives by other people's values and what do other people need, or how I will be influenced by other people or by the needs of other people. I'm not sure Disney was influenced by anybody, but he was influenced by the needs of other people. He understood what the public needed, and he fulfilled that need. So I'll try to get an understanding of those two different kinds of introversion and extroversion. And then after that, I'll just go wherever the chart leads me. A major aspect might pop off the page. Maybe placements of planets in houses. And the most, I won't call it the most important planet in the chart, because I don't think that there is such a thing, but the most personal planet is, I think, the ruler of the chart, in his case, Mercury. The ruler of the chart is the God to whom you live your life in service. That is going to be who you become more of. And his Mercury, I think, describes him very, very well. Partly, as I already said, in terms of the relationship with his brother, the relationship with his mind and the world of ideas, the ability to create his own world. The third house is theme parks. The third house is parks. They're a form of community or communes, like he started with the houses for his employees. And a lot of it was, yes, for money, for power, for influence, the Scorpio part of it. And also his ability to transform things, his ability to take stories and then turn them into movies. And in the third house, next we would go to, and I think this is very important here, his Sun-Uranus combination. The Sagittarius, of course, is the visionary. So of course, a lot of his creative thinking came from that. But also the Uranus, so inventive, so unusual, so groundbreaking, so out of this world, so speedy. His mind worked like electricity. So that Uranus is so much about breaking ground. That's something that my eye would really go to and would talk a lot about. But let me just go back to that Mercury again. The Mercury had a lot to do, I think, with what I would call his OCD. He would often get obsessed with his thinking. And as I say, to the point where his secretary would follow him around with a notebook to write down what he thought. He spoke a lot about not wanting to lose any ideas, which I think is the Scorpio control. But also, he smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day, Lucky Strikes, the unfiltered cigarettes, for decades. And in fact, he died from lung complications. The third house is smoking. Mercury in Scorpio is obsessive habits. And the other thing about that Mercury and a lot of the mutability in the chart is his, what shall we call it? His alter ego, Mickey Mouse. He, in fact, Mickey Mouse is a Scorpio. There's a date for when Walt Disney actually created Mickey Mouse, which was during the time of Scorpio. He did the original voice of Mickey Mouse. And one of his famous quotes later on in his years, in speaking about his enterprise, he said, "And let's never forget, it all started by a mouse." Scorpio, by the way, rules rodents, things that are buried under the ground. And Mercury, the ruler of his chart and midheaven, is his identity. I think he got away early on in his life, well, maybe later in his life also. I think he got away with expressing a lot of himself through Mickey Mouse. And just moving back to the Sagittarius, I forgot to say about Sag. He was also part of his cranky, difficult, hard to get along with personality. He was extremely judgmental, judgmental about politics, about religion, and very interested in proper behavior protocol. That might be a little bit the third house matters, but more so that moon in Libra. And Libra is much more concerned with protocol, with manners, with the right way to do things, with etiquette. And he placed a high emphasis on that. He was known to fire people instantly if they did anything that he didn't like. And one of the things that he didn't like was foul language. If you used any foul language, you were out. If he heard it, you were fired that day. And one other funny quirk that he had, what I would call part of his OCD personality, he could not stand trash or litter. And he had no problem walking through Disneyland or his movie lot. He had no problem picking up a piece of trash, a cigarette wrapper or a coffee cup, or if there was anything lying on the ground, he didn't tell somebody to pick it up. He would pick it up himself. So he had this very persnickety kind of character that is, I think, partly the moon in Libra, but also the Virgo rising and the emphasis on Mercury. It is, it's noteworthy, not only for today's purposes, and by today, I don't mean just our talk today, but this year's purposes, where we're in a period of a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And of course, he was born on the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So we'll see if there is something new, different, unusual that that the Disney studio resonates with as we move toward our version of the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. I make mention of that because one of my favorite things to do with charts is to look at how a chart operates after a person dies. It's more obvious with famous people, political figures and celebrities. It's more obvious because what they leave behind is more noteworthy, is more of a legacy, but it even occurs with individuals. And one of the interesting examples here. Let's go back to when he was alive. The movie that turned everything around for him was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And because before then, he actually was, he had just declared bankruptcy, actually. There was no money at all. And he became very invested in this project. And basically, he knew this is either going to make me or break me. He was an enormous risk taker, by the way. Again, the Sagittarius with the Sun conjunct Uranus. He was always taking risks. Obviously, the property that he bought for Disneyland in California, and then repeating it in Florida for Disney down there, purchasing that property was a huge risk, but it worked. So some of the things that were going on for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and this was released on December 21st, 1937, the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. Oh, I'm sorry, let me take a step back. I'm actually talking about the period between 37 and 40, in that 3-year period between the Seven Dwarfs and then Fantasia. And in that period, Saturn and Jupiter were coming together in a conjunction in Taurus. And that was falling in his 8th house. And it would go over his nodes. So in terms of making or breaking his fortunes, in terms of coming back from bankruptcy to then this movie being wildly successful, first with Snow White and then quickly followed by Fantasia, which of course is both of these movies, but particularly Fantasia, I think, still lives on and on and on. So that was a very important resonance. The 1937 came out when Saturn was at 28 of Pisces. And then by 1940, it moved into the conjunction with Jupiter. And yes, Saturn was in 1937 going over the angles. Well, that's where Saturn was when he died in 1966. And then 30 years later, for the first time ever, Disney came to Broadway with Beauty and the Beast. And although the theater community kind of shunned it, it became a huge success financially and set the stage, no pun intended, for more Disney projects to come. And they just came and came and came and made millions of dollars. And now often Times Square, which of course used to be known for its prostitutes and drug deals, is now sometimes called Disneyland. So we have this resonance of his coming back from bankruptcy with Saturn in Pisces, his death with Saturn in Pisces, and his resurrection with Saturn in Pisces. And in speaking further about what else was going on for the period of Fantasia, again, by then, Saturn and Jupiter came together in Taurus. But the other things that were happening, there was a solar eclipse at 8 of Libra on his moon, the moon ruling the 11th house. And that was his ability to kind of key in to the public, to the zeitgeist. But also what happened by progression is that Venus moved into Pisces. So Pisces being the sign of color, music, imagination. What more do you need than Fantasia for that? And how for another generation, not the generation of 1940, but the generation of the 1960s and 70s, the thing to do was get stoned and see Fantasia, a very Pisces experience. And Mercury was all important. Again, the rule of the chart, the rule of the midheaven, because it was at the critical degree of 29 of Capricorn, not only the critical degree about to change sign, but on the Venus in the fifth house, striking the success. So that really turned his fortunes around. But then, as I say, some 60 years afterwards, turning his fortunes around by coming to Broadway. I just always find that it's interesting to see what's happening in a person's chart after death, especially when it's someone who leaves a legacy like this. The one other chart to take a look at in relation to this, and which you can see fairly easily with just by looking at the natal chart, when we relocate his natal chart to Los Angeles, then what we come up with is a midheaven that is 26 of Taurus, which puts Mercury on the angle. Mercury goes right to the bottom of the chart. And again, that all-important planet then comes into the action part of the house, part of the chart rather, an angular house. And his midheaven, I'm sorry, his ascendant, interestingly, becomes 29 of Leo. 29 of Leo, emphasizing not only does the 12th house cusp become the first, taking all of that imagination and now expressing it, bringing it to the fore, but also Leo children, Leo royalty, and how he became such a king. So it's a good example of how relocation charts can help to emphasize our natal potential. So it was a smart move for him to move from the Midwest.
Do you incorporate relocated charts in your work often?
I do. If I know that someone is born in one place and now living in another place, I will always have that other chart available. I don't think that the relocation chart ever takes precedence over the natal, but it will let us know how the new place will receive us. Is it going to bring out something productive, or is it going to kind of sit on us? Is the new place going to welcome us, repel us, or do nothing? So I always have that information handy. There are times when people will ask me, because they have found out, either from other astrologers or through the internet, about astrocartography. Will you do my astrocartography and tell me where the best place is for me to live? And the answer to that question is no, I won't do that. You give me 3 cities that are realistic for you to live in. If it's not realistic, if you tell me that you want to live in Paris because it's the most beautiful city on earth, and there's no possibility for that to happen, then let's not waste each other's time. Give me 3 choices that are realistic. I will do your relocation chart, and I will tell you what you're likely to meet up there. That's how I'll work with that question. It also helps me know if someone is going to be leaving a place. Just yesterday, I read for a man who was born in Europe but has been living in New York for many years, and his New York ascendant is 27 of Capricorn. So with Pluto going over that, Saturn just going over it and Pluto going over it in the immediate years, and him feeling very restless now and wanting to go back to his home country, with Pluto going over the New York ascendant, the connection with New York would be disintegrating. Not quickly, not overnight, but in the course of the next year or two. Mm. So we could talk about, he's a return client, so we can talk very freely, very openly about his desires to go back, and that the chart was backing that up.
So you're saying the relocated degrees are particularly sensitive to your relationship to that place.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Interesting. Yeah. Wonderful.
And in my experience, this is not every astrologer's experience. We attract clients according to our own charts. In my experience, all of the easy places to live, the Venus places, the Jupiter places, I don't see that. My clients don't live there. They go on vacation there. My clients move to their Saturn lines, their Pluto lines, sometimes the moon or the node. But the most common thing that I see is people moving to a Saturn line. And to me, that makes sense because Saturn is about manifestation. And it promises that in this new place, you will manifest your natal potential. But I'm a very Saturn kind of person, so I attract very Saturn kinds of situations.
It's interesting with the Walt Disney chart. I remember his midheaven, Neptune midheaven line goes straight through Florida, of course, very close to where he was born. I remember thinking, what a wonderful place to have this vision of Disney World there as well.
Yes, a fantasy come true. Absolutely.
Yeah. And he didn't live to experience that, of course, but it was a dream for many years. To have that. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm sure people will get a lot out of the analysis. And I learned my astrology looking at a birth chart and having a biography in the other hand. And that I always recommend that, you know, to be interested in. We have Astro Data Bank, of course, now online, and you know, whoever interests you, read about them and see what they've done with the map, with the potential, with the seed, however you want to see it, or see what they've chosen. So biographies and real people, I think we learn a lot more than just simply dipping into books and looking at other people's ideas.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm always encouraging my students to read biographies and also to see biopics and keep the chart in front of you while you're reading about the person.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time and expertise, John, really. And thank you for choosing the Matthew Shepard Foundation as well to support. Those of you interested, of course, it can be found at www.matthewshepard, Shepard.org as well. So thank you so much for your time, John, and really appreciate your insights.
Can I also say one more thing? I have an article that I wrote for the NCGR Journal some years ago on the Walt Disney chart and going through his natal chart and 8 of the events in his life. So if anyone would like a copy of that article, you can reach me through my website.
Wonderful. Is it posted on the website as well? Or they'll need to just...
my email is posted there, but not the article yet.
Okay. Lovely. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, John. Appreciate that. Thanks for your time.